All right, hello. Thank you everyone for braving the weather today and making it out here. So this is an event that has been organised by Vote for Hong Kong, Hong Kong Watch, and Sutton Hongkongers, which is an organisation sort of formed by Richard Choi. And we are here today with candidates from each of the three major parties in the upcoming general election to discuss the issues that matter most to Hong Kongers and how Hong Kongers can make a difference to the election in Sutton and Cheam and Charshalton and Wallington. My name is Tom Drummond. I'm from Hong Kong Watch. But to kick us off today, I'd like to introduce Richard Choi, who's a community organiser who's been at the forefront of helping to organise BNO related events in Sutton. So please give a hand for Richard Choi.
Hello, welcome to coming to this event tonight. Right now it's June. I remember 5 years ago, 2019. It seems like a long history, but I think for most Hong Kongers at that time, I think attendance here at that time, still in Hong Kong. Any one of you was still in Hong Kong in 2019? All of them. Yeah, that's reasonable because BNO visa started just like 3.5 years ago. So in June 2019, actually it's really a real chapter, a new chapter for every one of us. And what we happen in Hong Kong, a lot of social movement and things like that, protests. So protests and all of them. One of the major reasons is that the government of Hong Kong or China, they promised us something that they didn't deliver. They promised us something in the constitution, small constitution in Hong Kong, and that is general elections. And we are so surprised that at the end we can take part in general election, but just a different place. So I think for all of you, it will be your first time in your life to take part in the general election. And that's why I think it's so important to have an event like this, to organize, so that we can hear from the party and we can hear from all the candidates by ourselves. Start from 2020, I started to support social integration of Hong Kongers. When they arrive, we try to address issues early as possible, try to avoid discrimination, social conflict, and so on. And regarding social integration, one of the key things in the British value is democracy. And we all know they're so important. In democracy, there are two elements. One of them is about the rights. That is why we're right now trying to learn how to vote, how to use our rights. And the second thing is about responsibility. And it is important for us to learn what the party manifesto is about. It is important for us to learn the candidate, their personality, are they trustworthy? And then we use our votes wisely. That is mean that we make an informed decision. It is a responsibility, every one of us. And I'm so grateful that we are able to take part here. And I think right now I should stop talking and I pass the microphone back to Thomas. Thank you. Thank you.
So are you trustworthy? So to kick things off, I'd like to invite our candidates one by one to introduce themselves and then give a sort of 5-minute pitch about their party and ultimately why should Hong Kongers vote for your party. So if we could go in order and I can pass the mic along one to one. And there's your pitch.
Thanks, Tom. So thanks very much for inviting me, the Labour Party here this afternoon. And maybe just to start on the point of responsibility, which Richard mentioned, because I think it's so important here. Personally, I feel a real strong sense of responsibility towards the BNO community here in Sutton, because of my own story, my own family story. So, my parents came here from India in the late 90s. A lot of my family, a lot of my friends were part of the Ugandan migration that came from Africa to parts of Leicester, where I grew up and was born, and London, at North London, where I now live, and some families here in South London as well. Now, I know the challenges that they went through around coming to a foreign land, not speaking the language properly, not being able to integrate because they didn't have access to jobs, opportunities, and didn't know where to turn to. And that's got easier as generations have gone on. And you now look at the story of my community. I'm really proud to say I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of the giants that came before me. And to be here and have the opportunity to help that next migration story, the great migration story of Hong Kongers that have come here, which is a much bigger story in terms of numbers and the impact you're going to have on British society. So I feel really strong sense of responsibility and really proud to be here today in front of you. So thank you for inviting me. So let me put forward Labour's message. And you know, we will all have seen, you've lived here for 3 years, lived here, I'm 31 years old. I've lived through a Labour government and I've lived through 14 years of this Conservative government. And what it feels like at the moment is that nothing quite works. Wherever we turn to, we're kind of going from one chaotic mess to the next. So Labour have come forward with a very clear plan, 5 missions and 6 first steps to get the economy back on track. So we need to grow the economy to make sure we're not having higher costs on our mortgages, higher bills, and paying even more taxes than we are today. We need to get the NHS back on its feet. That's our number 2 priority. 40,000 extra appointments delivered through extra appointments on evenings and weekends. We need to get our economy ready for the future, right? So that's delivering GB energy to make sure we can have homegrown power here, so we have energy security, but also lowering our bills in our houses. Number 4, Border Security Command, to make sure we've got control of our borders, but also smashing the criminal gangs that are taking advantage of vulnerable people in our society. More teachers, 6,500 teachers across our state schools will be delivered in the first Parliament by Labour. And finally, getting control of our streets, right? Crime has been rampant. So we'll be delivering 13,000 frontline police officers, many of them that have been cut under this Conservative government, to make sure we feel safe in our communities and we can restore trust back into policing. So those are 6 clear steps that we've committed to delivering on day 1. And those are steps that impact all of us across the country, but also is a real issue, I know, to Hong Kongers here in Sutton. So I'll pause there. That's my story. That's Labour's plan to get us started. I really look forward to today's discussion and to get into some very more specific issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming today, because as Richard said, I know that this is an alien to a lot of you. So you're welcome, and it's very good to see so many of you here. So, who am I? I'm Tom Drummond. I'm a Conservative candidate. I've been living in Sutton for just over 17 years, which I think that qualifies me as being a local candidate. I was first elected in Worcester Park as councillor in 2018. I was then re-elected in 2022, and I've been the Conservative group leader in principal opposition on the council since 2020, so just over 4 years. And I say this often when I'm talking to your community. It never escapes me how lucky I am that I can stand in front of you as an opposition leader in the council, and I'm free to be able to say what I feel without fear of any type of persecution. And I think that's really important. So when you're hearing, whether it be Labour, Liberal Democrats, or myself, I think we're all open, and we all realise how lucky and fortunate we are. So the Conservative Party, well, obviously, we are the party in power at the moment, and it will be up to you to decide if that continues. Contrary to what some might think, there is the plan. It is beginning to work. We're seeing inflation come down. We're seeing debt come down. The other day, somebody said to me, well, why are you a Conservative? What makes you a Conservative? And for me, I have 3 core values that I believe that make me Conservative, and I think they're quite sort of, you may share quite a few of them. The first is family. I believe that family is very important, and it doesn't necessarily have to be what is considered a nuclear family. I think the definition of family has changed over the years. So I don't think it's 2.4 children and a man mother-in-law, but it has to be a family unit. Now, I didn't come from a traditional family unit, so I know how important that is. The second is education. And when I say education, it doesn't just mean schooling. I know a lot of you may have moved to Sutton because of the schools. So we do have very good schools here. But education for me is fulfilling everybody's potential and giving them the opportunity to fulfill their potential. Whether it be somebody with special education needs being able to feed themselves with a spoon, or somebody running $1 billion corporation, we should give them the opportunity to fulfill that potential. And it's incumbent on us to provide that. And the third is rewarding hard work. And that can be through your taxes. It can be giving you the freedoms to do what you want, when you want to do them. Now, they're my 3 core principles. But as was said, the other principles I will fight for to the end of my days is freedoms. The freedom to worship, the freedom to have opinions, and the freedom to live your lives how you want to live them and not be dictated to by the state. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bobby Dean. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for Charshalton and Wallington. For those of you who don't know, that's the eastern half of this borough. You'll also be hearing a little bit later from Luke Taylor, who's the Lib Dem representative for Sutton and Cheam. So we're sort of tag teaming this evening. What you'll get from both of us is a strong local champion. It's a bit of a cliche in Liberal Democrats, but I want to explain a little bit what we mean by that. It means that we'll be knocking on doors to listen to you all year round, not just at election time, and taking action throughout the course of the Parliament, no matter what the outcome is. Whether we're in opposition, whether we're standing as candidates, whether we're in office, that's what we will do. And that is quite core to liberalism, because we believe that power should be close to people. We don't like power to be centralised, and part of that activity for us is making sure we stay in touch with our local communities. And I hope that some of you recognise that we've already been doing that with the Hong Kong community. This was my first Hong Kong community event. I've not just shown up the photos either, I've tried to engage with the issues that matter to you. I've been writing to the Home Office about students being charged home fees, for example, or social workers not having their qualifications recognised. We've also been working with Sutton Council on those issues. So we've already taken action despite not being in office in some of the issues that matter to you. But it's not just a strong local champion in your community, it's also a strong Liberal voice in Parliament. And I'm going to talk a little bit about values as well, actually, because we'll address some of the policies in the questions later on. But some of the values that are important to liberalism. First of all is that scepticism of power. So what we mean by that is we don't like power to be concentrated in one place, whether that's too heavily concentrated in a government, or whether that's too heavily concentrated in corporations. If corporations have too much power, that's a bad thing. We need better regulation, we need fairer and more efficient taxes, and we need to break up monopolies so that markets can work properly. But also, if we have too much power invested in government, that can be a negative thing. Maybe I don't need to say that to this room, but it's something that we're very watchful of, and that means that we need strong rule of law. We need appropriate separation of powers, you need checks and balances, and you need to have strong institutions to ensure all that happens. The other thing that's core to liberalism is opportunity. And our version of opportunity isn't just the legal opportunity to do something. We're talking about deep opportunity. It means that you have to have a level playing field, and you have to have the real opportunity to pursue your life. That means that we're going to need strong public services, and that, unfortunately, that's something that has been cut back over the last 10 to 14 years. We have seen a decline in public services of all kinds. Waiting lists on the NHS are far too long. Police don't really investigate crimes anymore, and the education system is not what it could be. And we're saying that we need to see much greater investment in public services if individuals are going to have proper opportunity in our country. And so I want to talk a little bit about politics in Sutton as well, because you live in a slightly unusual place in British political terms. I mean that kindly. But the council here has been run by the Liberal Democrats for 38 years. That's not usual. Most places in the country, you will see that there'll be a battle between the Labour and the Conservatives. Those two are the parties you're going to see in the media the most. But in this area, it tends to be between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. And that's partly because of what that thing I said at the start was. We've worked incredibly hard in this community to earn people's trust. And so in this election, you are likely to end up with either a Conservative or a Liberal Democrat MP. You can look at the electoral history to see that. But one thing that you might think on the back of that is, well, what does the Liberal Democrats look like in Parliament then, if you're not that competitive across the land? And I want to tackle that question head on, because I think having a strong Liberal voice in Parliament can be a really effective thing, no matter who's in power, whether it's a Labour government or a Conservative government. And I want to sort of just point to one example. Some of you may have heard of our leader, Paddy Ashdown. He was our leader in the late 80s and early 90s. And he was pretty much ridiculed for his relentlessness on focusing on a pretty niche issue as far as British Parliament was concerned. He faced bigotry within the Conservative government on this issue, and he faced political opportunism from the Labour opposition at the time. But he persisted with it. And that issue that he stuck with was the rights of Hong Kongers and the international agreement that we needed to get in place to protect the rights of Hong Kongers going forward. And obviously that agreement is something we're still fighting to be in existence to this day and to be honoured to this day. So I think the Liberal Democrats can make an incredible difference in Parliament when we stand up and are strong and have enough of us in there. And I think that is what I'm going to be asking you to do in this election, to send more Liberal Democrats to Parliament, to be that strong Liberal voice and be a strong local champion in this community. Thank you.
Okay, so for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to give all of our candidates around 2 minutes to give a sort of short, punchy answer to the question. We have 3 questions that are broadly themed around international, domestic, and then local politics. So big picture to small. And each of those issues, one or more of you sort of touched on them in your opening address. So I'm going to give each of you the chance to go first on the question. And so for the first question, I'm going to turn first to Tom, our Conservative candidate. The number one issues for BNOs in a survey that was produced by Vote for Hong Kong was foreign policy and the Hong Kong-China bilateral with the UK. This is an issue that Hong Kongers obviously care a lot about and are to some degree not satisfied with the UK government's approach towards China and Hong Kong. I'd like to know from all of our candidates, how would your party manage this incredibly important bilateral? And yes, starting with you, Tom.
Thank you. And if I'm to be, but I can see why you would look at it and think perhaps we haven't done as much. I remember, I think it's in 2022, watching the documentary in the Crown Theatre about the treatment that Hong Kongers were getting from China. I mean, it is if we see China as being a risk against our values and interests, and of course democracy. I think we as a party we need to watch China, continually look at them and make sure that that the infiltration that they might be doing in the UK, if that is happening, we need to stop it immediately. We need to stamp down on it. We should be using every sort of lever within our capabilities of doing that. When it comes to human rights, we should be working with our international partners, G7 things to ensure that those human rights are upheld. And I think it was 75 years ago that we signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it is important to us as a country, and we need to ensure that it is upheld, and in China are breaking them, that they need to be held to account.
I think I follow obviously this country under the Conservative government.
Shall I use let's use this one. This one seems trustworthy.
Hello, good. I'm afraid I think under this Conservative government, our policy towards China has been erratic at best and weak at worst. We've had moments of hostility and moments of recognising that China can be a threat, but mostly I think we've been pretty soft. Part of that is because we've walked away from our European partners and we're feeling quite lonely in the world at the moment and quite vulnerable. And so we are scrabbling for things like trade deals instead of standing up for some of our truer democratic principles. I noted that Tom used the word risk. I'll go further. I'd say that we need to recognise China as a threat to democracy, not only in their surrounding region, but across the world. We need to be firm about that. I think we need to go further still and recognise that them breaking this international agreement requires reporting to the International Court of Justice. And some of the individuals involved in human rights abuses, we have something in the UK called Magnitsky sanctions, which are ways in which we can target individuals that have been involved in human rights abuses. And I think that the UK government needs to be going further and considering Magnitsky sanctions against those individuals. I know that there is great worry in the community about Chinese state surveillance that's happening here in the UK. We do need to wait, I guess, for the official parliamentary report before we can say what action needs to be taken. I think that's the prudent thing to do. If we want to talk about institutions, we need to trust ours as well to investigate the matter and come up with recommendations and then take those recommendations. But to my mind, I think the evidence is quite clear about the types of activities that are happening here, and we need to be wise to that, and we need to start taking some proactive action as well. So my view is that we need to recognise China not just as another thing on the risk register of global affairs, but as a genuine threat to democracies worldwide, and we need to be much more wise to that.
Thank you.
So we've been very critical of government policies towards China, and I think the biggest issue that we've had in this country is so much inconsistency and so much instability around what our position is. I mean, the Intelligence and Security Committee had called the Conservatives' approach towards China inadequate because depending on who the leader is tomorrow, you've got a different position on China. We've had 7 defence secretaries and 8 foreign secretaries in the last 14 years. That is no way to run foreign policy initiative. So Labour have been very clear. If we get into government, the first thing we'll do is run an audit on the China-UK relationship. And I think that's the right thing to do, and it's a responsible thing to do. We want to have a stable and a consistent position towards China. And we've also got to recognise that China is the second biggest economy in the world. So there's going to be areas that we're going to be competing economically. There's going to be areas that we need to cooperate on global health, on climate change, and those are areas that are going to be important for us. But also recognise that where there are areas that we need to hold them accountable, we should do that. And that's where the accountability on human rights abuses, where they're threatening, where there's threats to Hong Kongers living here, and also Hong Kongers abroad. So we need to hold them responsible and hold them accountable. And actually, don't just take my word for it. Our actions on this have been consistent. So David Lammy, our Shadow Foreign Secretary, has been very consistent on his position over the last year that if Labour come to government, we will hold China accountable for human rights abuses and we will work with international partners to do so. Catherine West, who's our Minister for Asia and Pacific, has also been extremely consistent on her position towards supporting the rights of Hong Kongers and making sure we're calling out and also making the issue of transnational aggression visible, talking about it consistently in Parliament. And so Labour have been consistent on that, have been consistent on our foreign policy position in opposition, and we promise you, if we get into power, what you'll get from us is stability and consistency towards our approach in China. I think that's the most important thing that we can offer at this stage.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Does this work? Can you hear me? Not really. Okay. Then we'll go back to the
How many microphones have we got?
We'll keep on chopping microphones until the right one works. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, guys. So, on the domestic front, and here I'm going to turn first to Hersh, because you talk about jobs and opportunities. And research that both Hong Kong did, and also my previous organisation, Welcoming Committee for Hong Kongers, when we did a government-sponsored survey of 2,000 Hong Kongers across the UK. We asked them about their financial and their emotional well-being. And we were concerned about asking these questions to Hong Kongers because we feel like Hong Kongers on the whole are a fairly private bunch, and if you get up to ask them, sort of, how are you feeling, and how's your wallet, they might not be willing to answer. But we were surprised that we got people were very honest that they were feeling very stressed about living in the UK, the cost of living crisis. And this is obviously going to be a defining issue in this election, not just for Hong Kongers, for everyone. And so I wondered, for all of the parties, I would like to know what is your party planning to do to make life in the UK more affordable? I'm going to start with you, Hersh.
Thanks. No, thanks. And I'm glad you raised the issue around speaking up, because my partner, she's a psychologist who works in the NHS, and she speaks to a lot of Hong Kongers, and so she's acutely aware of the stress and the strain, particularly young people are going through that have moved over here and trying to adjust to the way of life living in the UK, and also worried about loved ones abroad. So I'm really proud that the Labour government have committed to 8,500 new mental health practitioners in the NHS to support, and many of them will come into Sutton. On cost of living crisis, I mean, this is the biggest issue facing us today, and this is why Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have made this our number one priority. Without economic stability, we can't tackle the cost of living crisis, right? So this is making sure we've got fiscal prudency, so we don't have what we had with this trust budget, where our mortgages have skyrocketed £400 a month on average. That's why we're committing to investing with GB Energy and investing in renewable assets in this country. So we've got energy security in the long term, where we've got fighting against threats like Russia to make sure we have our own homegrown energy, but also that will reduce our bills by average £300 a year by making sure we've got homegrown energy. So that's one thing. We've committed to home insulation schemes that we can insulate our homes to reduce the cost of energy bills in our homes, because we've all felt it in our pockets in the last couple of years, and it's been a real big issue. Another thing that isn't spoken about enough, I mean, the Tories talk about being on the side of the drivers a lot, and it ends up being about culture wars, but actually what we've said is we're going to bring in the regulators to crack down on the skyrocketing car insurance prices. I think we've all seen it, insurance premiums going through the roof. And often it's a postcode lottery, often it's certain ethnic minorities that are targeted with higher insurance prices. That's something we're going to do, and that's money straight back into your pockets. But we've just got to re-emphasise, the most important thing that we can do over the next Parliament is offer stability and really make sure that we've got secure foundations of our economy, that we can grow the economy, and that means we've got more money in our pocket. When Labour left government in 2010, we had an average growth rate of about 2.2%. We're at about 1.6% at the moment after 14 years of Conservative government. Now the difference in that growth rate would have meant tens of billions of pounds that went into public services, that would have been lower taxes that we could have paid into. So we've done it before, and we'll do it again. And so only Labour can be trusted to stabilise the economy and really help us out of this cost of living crisis.
Thank you. So, firstly, I'm really pleased that when you're asked how you're feeling, that you do open up and say how you're feeling. My mother suffered exceptionally badly from mental health issues, which meant I had to go and live with another family, and perhaps had she was able to talk about it back then and people accept it, she wouldn't have been as ill as she was. So it's a good thing, and I'm really pleased that this community is able to do that. Right, so I could sit here, or stand here really, and I could say that the UK is the fastest growing in G7, and we're the 6th biggest economy, but what would that mean to you? Well, it doesn't mean very much if you're not feeling the effect of it, if there's not money in your pocket. Now, we've just heard how when Labour was last in, they had a growth rate and it was far higher than it is now. What they're not telling you, of course, is when they left office in 2010, there was a note that said no more money left. They basically almost bankrupted this country. So it did take 14 years for us to recover. And to be fair, the Liberal Democrats played their part in that, in the coalition years, and they did it. And probably, to be honest with you, if they were to be fair, they made a sacrifice electorally in order to do that. But they played their part in the recovery. And when I talk about recovery, that's what we're seeing at the moment. There is a recovery happening. Inflation has come down. Debt is coming down. Now, the way to get growth going is to incentivise entrepreneurship. So the way we're doing that, for example, is national insurance. By the end of next Parliament, if you're self-employed, you won't be paying national insurance. That's going to start getting growth and start putting more money in your pockets, because we can start cutting taxes. Because I believe, and one of the three other members I talked about, remember, rewarding hard work, I believe that putting money in your pocket, if you take those risks and you work hard, means you should be rewarded for it. It shouldn't be the state taking your money and deciding how it spends it. It should be you having your money and deciding how you spend it. Thank you.
I'm afraid that last sentence is exactly why nothing works anymore, because it's an attractive political offer to tell the voters that we're going to cut the taxes once again. But what it does is it has a trade-off, and it means that the police won't investigate your crimes. It means that the healthcare service won't be there for you, and it means that the schools won't educate their children to the standards required for a modern workplace. And that is essentially the choice that's being put forward in this election. Whether or not you want the public services that are there to provide opportunity to everyone in this country to work again, or whether you prefer another 20 quid in your back pocket with this small-scale national insurance cap that's been offered by Rishi Sunak at the last minute out of desperation, because that's where we are in this election. The big ticket items in the cost of living crisis are going to be to do with housing, your energy bills, and the pay packet you take home. And on all three counts, we're failing as a country at the moment. We've failed to build our target number of homes in this country for well over a decade now, and that means that the cost of renting is crippling, the cost of getting onto the housing ladder is crippling, and worse still, we've sold off so many social homes that if you are in need of a home provided for by the state, you're unlikely to get one. You're going to probably be put with your entire family into unsuitable temporary cramped accommodation, and by temporary we mean we'll be stuck there for years, because we basically have sold off our stock of council homes, so that safety net people has gone. That is a particularly strong issue for me. I grew up in a council home. My dad was a scaffold and mum was a cleaner. They're still council tenants in a council home that I grew up in. And that, for them, has been their security during this cost of living crisis. If they were forced into the private rental sector right now, I don't know where they would be, because they simply would not be able to afford it. And that's what we're putting people through in our country at the moment. So we need to have house building in this country on a generational scale. I'm pleased that here in Sutton, we have been meeting our house building targets as a Liberal Democrat-run council, and if you just walk 5 minutes out here, you'll probably see our contribution towards that. And we're also mindful that we need to protect the character of our borough as well, so we're trying to concentrate our development in suitable locations, such as around Sutton High Street, where it's already built up. So you will see the character of our borough, our parks, our river, our lovely green spaces protected, but you will also see us deliver on homes. The other major element is going to be energy bills. Now, of course, it's not entirely the Conservative government's fault that energy bills have shot up, because we're talking about a global crisis in the cost of energy. But they have refused to do a very simple thing that I still don't understand why they haven't done, which is to impose a windfall tax on the energy giants. If they are making unforecasted profits that are so large that you've got the executives saying they're not quite sure what to do with the money and they're just going to issue new dividends to their shareholders instead, at the same time, the families are facing crippling bills that are double what they were a few years ago, then it's not difficult to think that maybe we should tax those profits temporarily, whilst we're in this crisis, a little bit more, and redistribute those to the people that are in need with their bills. It's a very simple solution. The basic reason it hasn't happened, or it's happened in a very weak form, is because these companies will say, well, we need that money for investment. And so what the Conservative government have done is create lots of loopholes for investment, and what those companies have done is taken advantage of that and basically paid none of the windfall tax. So these are two simple things we do. The final one I mentioned was work, and that is obviously a more difficult nut to crack. How do we get work to pay in this country? I think there's two sides. One is the government can lead with a proper industrial strategy. Almost every major developed economy in the world now chooses what it wants to be best at and pursues that. We don't have no such strategy in the UK. We are totally aimless of what we want to be the best in the world at. What that means is some of the things that we are the best in the world at end up leaking. So whether it's the creative industries or whether it's certain sections of the tech industry, they're wanting to go push the shareholders in the US and elsewhere and not maintain their bases here because we've not got a government that's willing to support those industries. The second thing, it's the thing I started with my open speech, is about human capital. And if you are going to withdraw the amount of funding for public services we have done, you're not going to have a healthy enough workforce, you're not going to have a safe enough workforce, you're not going to have an educated and skilled up workforce. And we need to make sure that we are investing in public services too, so that we have the human capital to do in our country too.
Thank you all.
So we've tackled China, we've tackled the cost of living crisis, and now most pressingly of all, e-bikes. So at the constituency level, all of you are running to represent either Sutton or Charshalton. And based on responses to our sign-up form, one of the issues that is concerned locally amongst BNOs is the theft of e-bikes and crime levels generally. So I'd like to know, how do you propose to make South West London a safer place to live and work? And I will go to Bobby first, as you talked about being local champion of the Lib Dems.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks very much. So, first of all, I should probably just explain that the way the system works in the UK, crime is primarily the responsibility of the Mayor of London, but he gets the majority of his funding from the Home Office and national government. So actually, local councils and Sutton Council have a very little role to play in the setting of sort of budgets and how we run the police service. And I think probably both Labour and Conservatives have been pointing at each other as the reason why policing has gone badly in the capital for some time. Conservatives will say that they've given the money to Sadiq Khan and he just needs to get on with the job. And Sadiq Khan will say that he's been stripped of the resources. And there's a bit of truth in both, to be honest. So there is a certain amount of money that's been earmarked to the Mayor of London to recruit officers that he's found to spend. That's because of all sorts of problems in the Metropolitan Police Force. They're really struggling to recruit officers because of the reputation of the force and some of the problems that they've been having. It's not a very attractive job for people right now to go into. But it's also true that the overall funding packet for policing in the UK has been cut over the last 10, 15 years. And some of the things that have particularly poorly affected Sutton is that we've had our borough command units merged as an efficiency measure. What that means is that Sutton now is jointly organised along with Bromley and Croydon. Now, Sutton, on paper, is the fourth safest borough in London, so it's one of the safe boroughs around. What that means in reality, under a merged police force, is that the officers that you used to see walk around the community and do some of that preventative action and build the relationships with communities and spot crime happening early, and you may even know that officers' name. They basically don't exist anymore. They're sent off to respond to crimes elsewhere, usually in Croydon. So, again, I'm going to come back to funding public services properly, but I think it's extremely important. If we do that, then you'll start to see that community level policing come back. But that's only part of the problem, right? Because having a police force is about addressing the problem that's already happening, but you also need to be able to prevent that problem in the first place. So that again comes back to education, youth workers, youth services, other types of rehabilitative action with people that have already offended, and what the state of our prisons are and what the outcomes for our prisons are. So there are two ways of addressing crime, but for me it comes back to ensuring that we've got a police force that's able to operate on the ground in the community, but we're also investing into those preventative stuff that stops crime happening in the first place.
Yeah, sure.
Powell?
We're going in a cycle.
Well, look, this is a massively important issue, and I've also been a victim of this. I've had my bike stolen, and I've caught it on CCTV, and it's still not been investigated. I mean, there seems to be this culture, and it's not only in London; it's across the country, where there's almost an amnesty for criminals at the moment for low-level crime, so-called low-level crime. I mean, you may not be aware that the Conservatives, because they haven't got enough police officers and they haven't got enough places in prisons, there's an amnesty that if you nick something from a shop for less than £200, it doesn't even get investigated anymore. There's almost this culture of amnesty for crime which then permeates beyond shops thefts, it goes into e-bikes, it goes into other car thefts, and there's a huge amount of theft that's rampant in London now as a result of cuts. So I agree with Bobby there in the sense that we need further investment in our public services, and particularly in frontline policing. The difference here is Labour have got a fully costed plan to deliver this over the next Parliament. So we've said every community needs to have frontline police officers back, visible, working within the communities. Yes, that's 13,000 new police officers that will be deployed across all of our communities. I mean, another example, I've been a school governor for the last 10 years, and what we used to have was you'd have a dedicated police officer that would be allocated to person. Also, the local officers get to know the area very well, so get to understand where there's particular crime hotspots, particular areas of criminality, particular gangs, particularly young people that are likely to be impacted or get into crime. We don't have the resources to deliver that anymore because we've lost that frontline level of policing. Not only that, we've lost our youth services across not only London, but across the country. And these youth services and youth hubs were an important part of working with these young people that, if they didn't have those services, would then be going into criminality and be lured into these gangs of criminality. So that's why I think no other party has got anything to say on youth hubs, youth workers, but the Labour Party is committed to introducing youth hubs back into every community. So it's not only about making sure we've got police officers on the streets that understand the communities, but also we're preventing the crime happening in the first place by making sure we're working with people that are vulnerable and so they're not going into crime in the first place.
Thank you. So, we've heard a lot about funding, haven't we? All I'll say is it's very easy when you're in opposition to point the finger and blame everything on funding. What I would say is read their manifestos very carefully. Labour manifesto, fully funded. Look at the first 2 years. You may find a lack of figures there. But moving on, I was surprised to hear Bobby say that the police, they didn't understand the local area or they didn't understand the hotspots, etc. Because I spoke to my Safe Neighbourhoods team and they seem to understand it, and I think they do a very good job. But he's right. Sadiq Khan has the money. He could have put more police on the streets, and he chose not to. But I also agree with Bobby that prevention is the best way for you to feel safe and for your property not to be stolen. I'm a governor in a pupil referral unit, so that's where children can no longer be in the mainstream school, and they might have to go there for a long period of time or a short period of time to go back in. There's also great community organisations such as MAPS, which is a mentoring service. I mentor a 14-year-old. He was going down one path, and I think after a year he's going down a different one. That's how we also do it. We work as a community, we work with each other, and we make sure that people who are going down a life of crime stop and they become a valuable member of this society.
Thank you. Okay, for the next sort of 15 minutes then, I'd like to discuss in a bit more detail some of the BNO specific areas, and so I'm going to talk to each of the candidates on terms, and sort of in turn. And if I could first turn to Hersh. We did note Hong Kong Watch with a degree of gratitude that the Labour leadership has committed to this China audit when it comes into power. And you talked about the stability and the consistency of David Lammy as Shadow Foreign Secretary. It will be interesting to see if Labour does form the next government, how that stability and that consistency measures up once you're in power. Because, as you said, I've read David Lammy's sort of essay on progressive realism, and I understand there's a bit of a push-pull with regards to China's strategy developed by Labour, whereby on the one hand, the Labour Party wants to stand up to human rights violations and make sure that it holds China accountable so far as it is able. But then also there is an acceptance of or a recognition that on some issues, like on climate change, a degree of dialogue is necessary. And this may all well be true, but it's a very difficult balance to get right. And I'd like to press a bit more on this about how will a Labour government, or how do you think a Labour government should, get this balance right? And also thinking a bit about transnational repression, which is the other issue you talked about, and it's very relevant for the Hong Kong community here. Even for events like this one, there is a degree of concern or aware amongst Hong Kongers of appearing in events like this, and that really poses a risk to the ability of BNOs to participate in fundamental democratic rights like voting in an election. So, yeah, I'd like to hear a bit more, if possible, about how the Labour government is going to marry this sort of strong stance on standing up to human rights violations and holding China accountable with some of the other realities which of negotiating with China, which David Lammy seems to have already paid allusion to.
Thanks. No, that's a really important question. And look, I think it would be easy for us to say that we don't need to work with China, but that's not the reality of the world that we live in today. I mean, as I said at the beginning, China is the second biggest economy in the world, so we need to find a way to work with them. But what David Lammy has been consistent on is that we need to hold them accountable. And so, when it comes to, and this is, when it comes to, there's three things, when you start that sentence again, so there's three things. I mean, there's going to be areas that we're going to naturally have to compete with China on, and those things like supply chain. We can't solve things like climate change without countries like China, without countries like India. These are really important strategic partners for us. But Catherine West, David Lammy, Sarah Owens, I mean, you've just got to look at the record of what Labour's been saying in opposition about China. We've not been flip-flopping on this. Been very consistent that we must hold China accountable when it comes to human rights violations and when it comes to upholding democracy and the values that we agreed in 1997. So I'm confident in David Lammy, what he's saying, and I'm confident that we're going to be stable and consistent on our position. And I think the other piece to say is, from an economic point of view as well, we also don't want to give away too much of our power economically and be overly reliant on certain states because there's threats there. And again, that's why Labour's been very pragmatic to say GB Energy, for example, is an important strategic asset for us to own more of our supply of energy in this country because of the threats of Russia, for example. Similarly, in Asia, strategic relationships with countries like India become really important to have a counterbalance to the geopolitical situation in Asia as a counterbalance to China. So look, I'm confident in everything that we've been saying in opposition, and hence the China audit is the right way for us to get into government, because we've been in opposition not having all the information that the Conservatives have on national security. So actually, it's right when we get into government, we do a full audit, and then I'm confident we'll remain consistent. And then on the transnational aggression, I think it's a hugely important point, and I think it's very specific to Hong Kongers here. And I think there's a lack of visibility on this, to be honest. I don't think enough people know about it, not enough people talk about it. And I think that's the first thing. I mean, I'm sure other candidates will agree as well. I mean, we need to make sure whoever wins here in Sutton, we're making this visible, we're talking about this consistent in Parliament, and Labour parliamentarians have been doing so. Since the BNO scheme was introduced in 2021, it's been Labour shadow ministers that have been calling for further integration measures. I mean, Mayor of London has put hundreds of thousands of pounds into integration schemes here in London to make sure we're standing on the side of Hong Kongers. And on the issue of transnational aggression, I mean, only 3 days ago, the issue of Nathan Law's passport being cancelled, Catherine West again was first out, vocal about it to make sure we're standing on the side of Hong Kongers, whether they're here, whether they're abroad. And I'm confident if we form the next government, we'll continue this strong stance, be stable, and stand on the side of Hong Kongers all the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Hersh. And then turning to Tom. So it was, of course, under a Conservative government that the BNO scheme was introduced, although it did pass with broad bipartisan support, or tripartisan support, I should say. Yes, indeed. Sorry, a bit of an Americanism there. It's an issue on which the Hong Kong community here has benefited from a tremendous amount of goodwill and support from across all the parties, and we're pleased to see that. But it was the Conservative government that introduced the scheme, and we were pleased to see that the Conservatives committed to keeping the BNO scheme open in their manifesto. However, there are still some gaps in the scheme that remain. Those who were born before 1997, for instance, who were children, they were born after the 1st of July 1979, who did not have the ability to apply for the BNO passport scheme for themselves, but if their parents did not apply for them, they still are left without a route out of the city. In some cases, their parents might be able to leave, their siblings, younger siblings born after 1997, may also be able to leave, but they may still be stuck in Hong Kong. Migration is a tricky issue for this Conservative government. I would like to know, could the Conservatives commit to closing those gaps in the schemes and expanding it to ensure that more Hong Kongers who are stuck in Hong Kong are able to leave and find a safe passage to the UK?
Thanks very much. I'm not sure I'm in a position to commit the Conservative Party to this, but I can tell you what I can commit to, and that'll be your voice. You are right. You are all welcome, because we know what you've been fleeing from. And my commitment would be that I believe that yes, those sorts of things should be sorted. As I said, family was one of my key principles to begin with, and I still stand by that. And if there's families left over there that should be here, my commitment, I will be your voice and I will fight to get them over here.
Thank you. Short and sweet indeed. Bobby, this is an exciting election for the Liberal Democrats. There is the opportunity from the polls for them to significantly increase their seat share in Parliament, even certain ministers of Sir Ed Davey becoming the official leader of the opposition, but we shall see. The Liberal Democrats manifesto does make admirable commitments on the geopolitical stage, but the Lib Dem MPs are, of course, more likely to engage with BNOs in their role as constituency MPs, as you say yourselves, Lib Dems being local champions. So I would like to know a lot on those sort of everyday concerns, like finding employment. You talked a bit before about making work pay in this country, and that is a really important issue. But as you know, for a lot of Hong Kongers, getting on the employment ladder is still a challenge. There are issues with qualifications not being recognised, issues with, to be honest, not so much with the quality of English of many Hong Kongers, which is generally speaking really quite excellent, but with their confidence in speaking in English, especially for those from the sort of research that I've done who live in places like Scotland or somewhere where the local accent is having quite terrible. But there are nevertheless these issues which mean that a lot of Hong Kongers are not in jobs that really reflect their skill sets, that are perhaps in part-time contracts, 0-hour contracts. And I'd like to know more about what the Lib Dems can do to help Hong Kongers find employment, to help them get their qualifications recognised, and sort of help them get into work that pays.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm going to slightly reject the premise of the question, because I said at the start we can be strong local champions in the community, but I also said we give you a strong Liberal voice in Parliament. And actually, it's the Liberal Party that's been Britain's conscious on many international issues. I mentioned Ashdown's leadership on the issue of Hong Kong in the early 90s, when he was literally being laughed at in Parliament for persisting with this issue. I can refer to Kennedy's stance on the Iraq War. I can talk about the position we took on Europe. I can talk about the fact that we called for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza back in November. So very often, a Liberal voice in Parliament can be incredibly effective on international issues, even if we're not forming the official opposition yet, or even the government. So just to say that that strong Liberal voice in Parliament can be really effective. We can influence the agenda. We can set the agenda. And internationalism is a core principle for Liberals. So on those sorts of issues, we will see us speak strongly. Let me now address your actual question, which is about what can we do for people directly in the community. And it's simple stuff, right? It's working with people, it's understanding the issues, and then it's going to fight their corner, lobbying, right? So what are the specifics of the barriers that you're facing. Can we ask governmental departments questions to see if we can tease out if that's what those departments meant in the first place? Can we work with the local council to see if we can unlock any opportunities there? And on those things, that's exactly what I've already been doing as a candidate. So I've been working with other Hong Kong volunteers, with social workers, and some of you may be social workers in here tonight, but we understand there's this issue of the qualifications not being recognised, and you're essentially being asked to either do a conversion course or to get a renewed recognition from Hong Kong, of which it's not being forthcoming at the moment because of obviously various games that continue to be played. So what have I done? Well, first of all, I facilitated a relationship with Sutton Council. Sutton Council are short of social workers, so they're obviously very interested in the potential of employing new local social workers, and they put together a funding bid to see if they can get a course to get people onto a conversion course and to get them fully qualified here in England. That funding bid was not successful this time, but we've now started to identify a cohort of people that are interested in this. Simultaneously, I was asking the people that are already in Parliament to write to the Home Office and to write to the departments and say, is this the intention of this visa scheme, or has this been an oversight? Is this something we can fix? Can we get new guidance notes from departments to change maybe the requirements, to unlock this? We've got a huge shortage of social workers in this country. It seems crazy that we're going to block local social workers living here right now from being able to pursue that profession. So it's about engagement, it's about listening, it's about lobbying, it's about working with different partners, whether it's government or whether it's local government, and seeing if we can unlock that door. And of course, if I was elected to be your MP, I could do it a lot more directly myself. Thank you.
Strong words, everybody. As you know, we're going to move to the question and answer from the audience part of the evening. So if we could swap over our design candidates. Okay, so Luke, first of all, I think it's only fair to give you a sort of couple of minutes to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. It's a bit like in rugby, where they have the little fit, nippy winger play for the first 60 minutes, and they bring on the big, hulking, strong forward to finish off the end of the game. So a little bit about myself. I'm a candidate here in Sutton and Cheam. And like Bobby, I'm currently serving as a councillor in Sutton and Cheam. And it sounds very cliche, but I'm currently working hard for local residents, solving casework issues, and representing residents on the council. And I think that reflects the focus on being strong local champions. We are embedded in the community, we're working with friends groups to try and make Sutton a better place to be. And whilst I can do that effectively as a councillor helping with casework, what we both want to do, and I'm sure what others want to do, is go to Parliament, go to Westminster to fix the causes of those problems. And you've heard tonight a lot of the bigger questions that we want to fix, so that we don't then end up having to help residents in our surgeries and in our email casework to solve them. So I'm a local resident. I live in Belmont with my wife and my two sons. They use local schools, they use local playgrounds. We enjoy the green spaces. So again, it's in my interest as well as everybody else's interest to make Sutton and Cheam a better place to live. So hopefully, over the course of this evening, you'll hear a little bit about why I would like to be your MP and why I think I'm quite good at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Many rugby fans amongst the BNOs here tonight. So, first of all, do we have one of our volunteers or Richard as well to come and serve as potential translation services for anybody who does want to speak in Cantonese, because I frankly am not able to perform that function. But so just while I was on that, can I'll just explain. So if you could please, when you stand up, direct your question either to a specific candidate or say, this is a question generally. I'd like to hear all the candidates' positions sort of on it. That would be great. Do we have a microphone a second microphone that works? Okay, brilliant. Let's give it a try.
Thank you for the panel. My name is Lyndon Lee. I'm for BOA Mandarin. So I have a question for both the Dem candidates, actually. So recently I've received some...
Sorry, Lyndon, but in the interest of fairness, we will have to direct it to our forward, is it?
Look, right, okay, thank you, Luke. So some people were messaging earlier before I came here talking about the deselection, David Campanelli, a Christian candidate who was deselected by your party because of his faith. And some people accuse that being Moism or China style. So I would ask, look, how do you respond to that kind of question? How can you make sure the Hong Kongers can trust you to protect their religious freedom and their freedom of speech here after what happened to David Campanelli in your party? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I can't speak very much about it because I know there's currently an appeal taking place. But I would point out very clearly that all of our serving MPs in London are all Christians, are all practicing Christians. And here in Sutton, we conducted a process according to party rules. It was appealed and it was upheld again that it was conducted in the correct way. The process was presented by the Reverend Martin Broad here in Sutton, who's our membership secretary, and our candidates process is overseen by the Reverend Margaret Judge, who is also a Christian Reverend. So on that, I think that's really all I can really say regarding the appeal that's in process, but hopefully that gives a bit of reassurance that people of faith are welcome and are currently practicing and also performing as Liberal Democrat MPs in London and across the country.
Okay, we've got a couple here. So I think this chap is first here and then this chap here.
Good evening. So I do write down what I'm going to say tonight, because English is still my second language. I may sound a little bit American as well.
It's better than all of our candidates.
So if you ask me, I'm going to vote. Who's going to vote for the general election? Only if I can vote like the Americans do, I will vote for Mickey Mouse. I simply do not trust any British politicians. It will be 40th anniversary of the signing of the Sino-British Joint Declaration at the end of this year. You may ask why I remember clearly it is the 40th anniversary. Because I was born in Hong Kong weeks after both the British and the CCP signed the declaration. The Joint Declaration is one of the biggest scandals in British history. Otherwise, I wouldn't speak to you today. It has failed a lot of Hong Kongers. The question is simple. How come a country claimed to be the oldest democracy in the world will give up a piece of land to a dictatorship? Hong Kongers were never given a choice, but two countries still live behind closed doors. When I was 4, one night, I saw my mother sitting in front of the television crying, not because of some soap opera dramatic endings, but image of tanks running through a public square, people being carried at the back of the bicycle with a piece of wood on it. Blood was everywhere. This image hunted for me for the rest of my life. What is more hunting is the regime is going to take over my home in a few years' time. I simply shout, we are. The next word I cannot say it publicly, but you can fill in the blanks what was the word would be. After the Tiananmen massacre, the British government created a British nationality selection scheme to let the rich and privileged to become a British citizen. Ironically, one of the persons who granted citizenship through this scheme was suspected to spy for Hong Kong Intelligence Service, who also was a police officer in Hong Kong. It is so angry, the rest of the Hong Kong people were left behind. In 1997, I became a sixth grader. I still remember the school teach me, according to the basic law, by 2028, all seats of the Legislative Council will be democratic elect, and the chief executive will be as well. It all lies. When I finished middle school a few years later, it was time to decide to study abroad. There were choices like Britain, Australia, or America. I ended up going to America simply because a statement that made by my late father. The British has betrayed us. They will not help us. It's better off to go to America. And America, off I went. When I went to America, specifically, I went to University of Iowa, which is the first day in America that whole primaries.
Sorry, if I could just, in the interest of time, because we've only got so much time.
Yeah.
So I understand that the issue is that for you and for, I'm sure, many Hong Kongers, there is the sense that the British government never really made good on its appeal to or its promises, or its commitment to the Hong Kong people. And that
For the last 40 years.
Sure. And that the the BNO scheme that we have now is only really, say, a partial recognition of that fact. And so if we could sum it up for our candidates here who, can't really speak to the last 40 years of British foreign policy, but we can say, for the Hong Kongers that are here now, what do you think is the main thing that your parties could do, your leadership could do to demonstrate their commitment to the Hong Kong community that is now here?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a incredibly powerful story. Look, I think the main thing that we can do, and we have recognised that we, the British government, I think all parties recognise that we have a responsibility towards Hong Kongers, and to stand alongside Hong Kongers that are living here in the UK to make sure they can get on with their life, but also those that are still out in Hong Kong, and I'm sure many of you have family members still there as well. So I think the main thing we can do is continue to acknowledge we have responsibility. I think the BNO scheme is the beginning. That can't be the end of it. I mean, that is just the start of the process. And actually, as I start my speech at the start this evening, I mean, this is going to be one of the most remarkable migration stories in British history. When you look back at the number of people that have come over from Hong Kong, but actually the contribution that is going to be made to this country as a result of this is going to be extraordinary. But we're now living through the process that we need to help and support and acknowledge our responsibility to make sure there's a smooth migration, integration, but also responsibility to hold China to account for continuing to break the agreement that we signed in 1997.
May I add one thing? So last year, when there was protester attacked, when there was protested for Hong Kong protesters in the UK, it's raised concern to me the safety of all the Hong Kongers. So I wrote a letter, both my local MP and the Prime Minister, regarding the question of the safety of Hong Kongers. I hand delivery to my MP. I never heard from them. This is the letter. I sent it to number 10. I sent it through a courier. It got returned a couple of months later. It was never delivered. How am I supposed to trust you if you a lot of politicians say they will listen to us, but look at this. This is the evidence. I got rejected. Please.
So, just on what Hersh said, I agree, and what you're saying, which if I understand correctly, is how can you trust us? Yeah, and that's essentially what it comes down to, because you've been let down, it sounds, time and time again. I think I'm going to speak for almost every candidate, and I think they'll all agree with me. We're doing this because we all want to make a difference to people's lives, and we want to make a difference to people's lives for the better. That's why we're standing. Now, to do that, we obviously need to rebuild trust. I can't comment on why your letter was returned or what have you. What I can say is if that was me, we would have been having a discussion and I would have been being your voice. But I think it's important to realise that we're standing, all of us, and whoever's elected, I've got no doubt they're going into it for the right reasons. And those reasons are to make your lives better. And that's what I think we'll all do. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom and Hersh. I agree broadly with the suggestions there. I think I would give you the reassurance that as Liberal Democrats, we have a history of standing on, as Bobby made reference to earlier, the right side of controversial issues. We are not afraid to be contrary to the established view, and I refer again back to Paddy Aasha being very early in his acknowledgement and understanding of the challenge and of the upcoming challenges around the Hong Kong transition. I think the Iraq War was another example where the Liberal Democrats stood up and stood against a lot of the conventional thinking on what was happening around the world. So relating that specifically to your question, I think that as Liberal Democrat politicians, we are unencumbered and we have a track record of being quite free thinking and able to accept narratives counter to the overall, the perceived wisdom, as it were. Again, the example of calling out the situation in Gaza and Israel very early on. Now, the reality is, and again we've referenced this earlier, the Liberal Democrats, unfortunately, this time are probably not going to be running the country. Ed Davey is far too busy with water slides to be Prime Minister. But that means that we are going to be able to be speaking out. We're not going to be encumbered by being the establishment. Liberal Democrats will always be that counter voice to perceived wisdom. So, in a Liberal Democrat MP, you will always have someone who will stand up and be able to shout about people's rights, to represent you in this particular circumstance, and to listen to you and reassure you that we will stand up for you as that local champion.
Thank you. Thank you. This gentleman here. Mike's coming. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Question for three candidates. I think you understand this debate about the role of the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office at this moment. And the role originally is a trade and economic office. Now they are more and more evidence or service that they employ people or even start doing some kind of spy activities and stalking of other people activities. And the first thing I want to ask is that if all this evidence finally come to a very concrete foundation, do you lobby your leaders of your party that we should terminate that kinds of diplomatic community to this office, or actually we should close the office, the first one? And the second is that I observed some document from the Parliament that there's a half-year report of Hong Kong delivered by the Foreign Office, but the numbers of MP participants in the debate is not so high, sometimes 50 or 40, it's not go to 100. The question is whether if you are elected, you will lobby all your colleagues to participate and initiate these debates. And the final one is very simple. As a leader member of the voter, you should be accountable to the voters. So do you promise that if you're elected, you will voluntarily hold this kind of town hall meeting every 1 time or 2 times a year? Thank you.
Okay, you didn't pay him to say that. But sure, we'd love to do that here. So HB, on HB ETOs, I understand that there is currently an open sort of investigation court case about this, and so I understand you can't comment on that directly. But there is an issue with the HB ETOs, also with Confucius Institutes, which has at times been a issue of political debate. I remember Rishi Sunak talked a lot about Confucius Institute at one point in time. So perhaps if it could just sort of a couple of words on that, and then also on the point about participation in debates on Hong Kong in Parliament.
Yes, no, thanks for the question. I mean, for my own personal commitment, absolutely, I'll be a strong voice for you in Parliament, and I will lobby on all these issues, and I, of course, commit, if I'm elected as your MP, to come here as many times as I'm invited to come and speak to you, because this is a two-way process. It's also a process for me and for us to learn about the issues and to take up those issues in Parliament and represent you. I can't comment on the specifics, but I will say on the issue of lobbying government ministers, I mean, last year, Catherine West, she stood up in Parliament when the 6 Hong Kongers had arrest warrants issued against them. And she asked the government whether they would reassess or assess whether any sanctions should be applied, for example. So I think that's an example of Labour ministers in opposition being consistent on this. I've been calling for the government, putting pressure on the government to make sure we're holding China and Hong Kong officials to account. I have no doubt they will continue to do that. And if they don't, I will make sure I hold them accountable and I will lobby for them every time.
So, regarding lobbying, I mean, I'm standing in front of you not just because I want to be an MP, but because I want to be the MP for Sutton and Cheam. And that is some of your home, some of obviously in Charshalton and Wallington. And if you elect me, I will be representing you, and I will be being your voice in Westminster, not Westminster's voice in Sutton. So yes, I'll be lobbying for you, 100%. Regarding events like this, absolutely. I mean, look, if we're elected, it's about us engaging with our constituents, whatever religion or community it is incumbent on us to come to you. And it's also, as you said, sir, if you come to us, we have to engage with you as well. So absolutely, yeah. I'll be your voice in Parliament. I'll fight for you. And we've heard a lot about sort of asking those difficult questions and not being afraid to stand up when perhaps you're you're expected not to. Listen, I've been the leader on the council for the last 4 years. I've been a councillor since 2018, and in all that time I've been in opposition. I know I've asked a very few difficult questions in that time, so I'm not afraid to do it.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to try and pick up one of the specific questions you asked, and there was reference about the Confucius Institutes. I think there is a concern over those that are still operating. So we need to audit the funding and the special interests of those institutes as a first step. And then if they're found to be counter to the interests of the UK, then we need to be bringing legal proceedings against them. So absolutely that needs to be done. Obviously we can't speak more about until we see the report and understand the implications further. The second point about standing up for local residents, and I think I'd link that to standing in front of local residents and being held accountable for our actions. Absolutely, we do it. I do it every month. We hold award surgery as a councillor on the high street, where residents can come up and they can moan about the bins and about the trees and the leaves blocking the gutters, and I can commit to doing something about it. As community champions, we are accessible. I know that Bobby holds ward surgeries in his office, but is often just able to be accessed by residents walking in to the front door and asking for help. So, these sorts of events are absolutely the cornerstone of community politics. It's where we came from as Liberal Democrats, and wherever the invite arrives in my inbox, do not worry. I will be there with an opportunity to promote our politics and also to answer questions and to give feedback and to be disagreed with. And that's our right, and that is really important to be disagreed with on actions that we've taken. If you feel like we need to be doing something different, so absolutely keep your best. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I have every faith that all of our candidates here tonight are absolutely being honest and committed in their, in their commitment to this community. But I would just like to add, if, like the gentleman here, you are struggling to have an issue brought to light with either your local MP or with other politicians, then Hong Kong Watch is always here, and pestering the government on behalf of Hong Kongers is what we do. So a plug for us as well. We can show of hands again for other people who'd like to ask questions. We've got quite a few, so if we could ask in here, gentlemen in red shirt and gentlemen in blue shirt, please, thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight. And I have two small questions. First is the BNO passports using e-gate. So I think there was a petition about that. Let me share my experience. I came back a few weeks back from my business trip, and I saw that I tried my luck with the e-gate, and it failed, of course. And I went to the counter where it was empty. The officer looked at me with his evil smile, pointing me to the other line. And in front of him is empty. He could use his discretion to help me through the border, but he pointed me to the other line. It took me more than an hour. I'm coming back from a business trip. It is not just a one-time thing, it's a frequent traveling. And with this BNO passport issued by the Home Office, it is not being used through the e-gate. It is a shame. I hope any of you being elected could help us through on this topic. This is a small one. Another one is, I think it's mentioned about a number of times about the university fee, home fee and local fee. Many of the Hong Kongers gave a lot of people a wrong impression. We are wealthy people, that we can be taken advantage. And many of the families cannot even afford their cost of living and even university. And I'm one of them. And when we talk about the cost of living, 200, 300 pounds energy bill, we are talking about 50,000 per year, including the tuition fees and accommodation. So if you're talking about 3 years program, it's 150,000. So this is a big number. And there are families, we are unable to afford this kind of money for our children to the university. So I hope any of you being elected to make a voice to the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Easy one. Yes. In my day job, I'm an engineer, a transport planner. I actually work in aviation. So I spend a lot of time studying airport e-gates and also failing to get through airport e-gates. So I understand your challenge very clearly, but not to take up too much time. Yes, and absolutely yes, because there should be no second-class citizenship. It should be respecting, and it should be giving the dignity of being a home student and a home citizen for you and your children as required. Absolutely. Thank you.
I'll also say yes and yes, but also use it as an opportunity for some additional points to say. On the e-gates, I mean, we've all experienced it post-Brexit, having to also wait in queues we never had to wait before, so, I understand. But also the tuition fees, I mean, it was under the Conservatives and the Lib Dems that tuition fees trebled even for domestic students. I was the first generation to go to university, paying the £9,000 tuition fee. So I left university with about £50,000 debt, so I understand. I'm absolutely champion for it.
Yes, really tempted to just say yes and yes. No, e-gates, no, we're all in agreement on that. I mean, it is what it is, and absolutely, yeah, it should be changed. It's one of the many things I think personally which should be changed in the Home Office. So we can put that on our long list of things to do. So they're actually sorted. Tuition fees. I could make a political jibe here with Liberal Democrats. But I won't do. What I will say is, yes, in the best will in the world, we would do away with tuition fees and we would go free, but we do have to live within our means and show fiscal responsibility.
And also just note on the point about home fees that Hong Kong wants to launch our report on home fees earlier this year in the Houses of Parliament. Of course, our advocacy work on that has paused while we undertake this 6-week carnival. There's a general election, but
hold on, it's a carnival of a week. We monkeys or we
but yes, come the 5th of July, we will be back to sort of campaigning hard on this issue. So yes, I'm glad to hear you raise it. And the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Thank you. I've got 2 quick questions, one about your personality and the other one about more locally about the Sutton Tram link. First of all, where would you say you stand in terms of the political spectrum? So, for instance, would you say you're a One Nation Tory? Would you say you're a New Labour? Would you say you're a Social Democrat, etc.? Second, what are your opinions on the Sutton Tram link, which was ironically cancelled by Sadiq Khan, the Labour mayor, due to financial reasons in 2023? If you guys get elected, would you continue to push forward the Sutton Tram link or other forms of transportation? Thank you.
2 great questions. And yeah, on the, I mean, a good first question as well, because, you know, coming to a new country, all the parties are pretty broad churches. You know, there's a lot of disagreement internally among, you know, different traditions and so on. So yeah, it's good to sometimes get an idea of more, you know, what does being a Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem mean to you? I think that's really a question you go for. So you'd like to go first?
Thank you very much. 2 really good questions, thank you. So on the first one about my personality and politics, so I came to politics primarily through my father, who was a Liberal Democrat councillor, and Liberal Democrats, I mean, we keep saying this, and I'll help to give you context as a local champion. So you come to politics about serving your community, and you stand up and you happen to be the person who runs the Friends of the Park group, or you are the person who's school governor, who people on your street come to tell for advice, and then you're the person who kind of happens to be going to the council meetings, and you're then the person who starts delivering leaflets for a cause that they believe in, and then suddenly you're a councillor and you didn't really realise how that happened. And that's what happened to my dad. He didn't come to it through a political philosophy, he came to it through doing things for your community. I came to it in a very similar way. I was at university, I did engineering at Imperial College in London. I moved through various parts of London and started to do leaflets for people who I admired in my community, and then worked my way up to being a candidate. And so my politics isn't really a tribe. The Liberal Democrats were very pragmatic, I think, and as an engineer, I see problems and I try and find solutions. And with a philosophy that we look for fairness and to stand up for the underdog, that's where I came to and seem to agree with my father's approach to become a Liberal Democrat activist and then a politician. So my politics is really very much about evidence-based policy, fairness and standing up for the little guy. So I don't know whether that really answers your question. It's very difficult to put a label on a lot of Liberal Democrats, as when you meet them, you will very much work that out. Sutton Tram link, as a transport planner, I have a particular interest in trams. They are quite possibly the most incredible urban transportation mode anywhere invented in the world. It's a crying shame that in London we tore them all up many years ago. On the Sutton Tram link, it is absolutely going to be the key to really provide the benefits of the future Institute of Cancer Research and the Cancer Hub on site the old Marsden. Moving people around Sutton is always a challenge because of very close roads. The Sutton Tram link particularly good because it would link up the St Helier Hospital, the new hospital site, Sutton Town Centre, and the underground in South Wimbledon. It is a shame that the funding was withdrawn and cancelled. I do understand that the business case was challenging, but I would like to see that be returned to whenever possible. And I believe that the success of the Devon Sutton Council in developing the Cancer Hub at the Royal Marsden should provide a boost to the business case for that, and I'd like to see it supported both by TfL but by the national government as well. And the replacement of the somewhat farcical approach to infrastructure spending under the Conservative government, which was the levelling up approach, which was various parts of the country bidding against each other for projects that all deserved and needed to happen to enable economic growth in our cities and in our regions around the country. Hopefully, there will be a more pragmatic approach to funding projects, and hopefully the Sutton Tram will be one of the ones that benefits from that.
You know, Luke and I were at Hustings earlier on today, and the last questions were the most difficult, and I think the question you just asked about where I sit politically is probably one of the most difficult I faced. Because it's very difficult, because there will be certain parts of the Tory party, and I will be in one camp, and there's other, so for example, let's take fiscal responsibility, I'm definitely in one camp, where when it comes to social care, I move very to the left, I'm in another camp. So I don't think I can actually say I'm like this or I'm like that, because it depends what topic we're talking about. And that shows the broad church of the Conservative Party is, I guess. Regarding transport, yeah, I mean, it was very disappointing that the tram went. I mean, you know, transport in Sutton just isn't good enough. And we've been hit double, because one, it's not good enough, and two, Mayor Khan has imposed ULEZ on us. Now, for absolutely, to be crystal clear, I'm against ULEZ. I'm not for ULEZ with conditions. I'm not for ULEZ, I am against ULEZ. We need our cars in Sutton and we need to be able to drive. So for that reason, ULEZ should go. But that's just not good enough. So what we should be doing is getting people onto public transport, and the way we should be getting people onto public transport is making it easy for them and making public transport accessible. So I go, you know, frankly, if it's a tram, if it's buses, if it's better train routes, I don't care what it is, we just need to improve transport in Sutton. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, my own political leaning. So I came to political awakening under the New Labour years, and for me, my values and the values that my parents taught me were education is important. You work hard, you get by, but actually the importance of giving back, and the importance of the community, and the importance of bringing people with you, right? And so, you know, not a pop-out answer, but again, I sit very much in the centre ground. You know, I think we need to work hard to get by. We need to invest in our public services to make sure when people do fall over, we can help pick them back up again. On the question of transport, look, I spent the last 8 years working in renewable energy, and particularly working on electric vehicle transportation. So I'm super passionate about anything that we can do to reduce air pollution in our cities, because it's awful, it's clogging up the streets, and it's literally killing us. And so tram-linked railways, I lived in Amsterdam for 2 years, and just how beautiful it was to be able to cycle around everywhere, to get on a tram and not need cars. You know, dependencies on cars. I appreciate we need it in some of these outer boroughs, and so I'm not saying we don't need our cars, but actually we need to invest far more heavily in our public transport and make sure it works. And that's why I'm so proud that the Labour government, or Labour government to be hopefully, committed to renationalising our railways, because they just do not work at the moment.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time, and my thanks to the gentleman for asking the question about, you know, where do you stand, because it does serve as quite a nice way to cap off a very interesting evening. My thanks to everybody for coming. My thanks for all of our panelists today, including Bobby, of course. Give a round of applause for all of our panelists. And a final reminder that, you know, if you do find yourself looking at a politician and wondering which party they represent and where they stand for, you can always just look at their tie. That's the quick way. Yes, my thank you. We covered some really good ground there, and some really good answers and performances from everybody. So yeah, thank you a lot. Thank you.